So at this time, because I'm just conscious of time as well, and before we go into our breakouts, I would like to invite Sarah Gadsden, the Chief Executive of the Scottish Improvement Service, who has joined us this morning. And I think it, you know, as everybody will know, we have close ties in terms of with Scotland, so we're also keen to hear about the developments there. And this is particularly the case when it comes to both community planning and the transformation to an outcomes-based approach to government. So you're very welcome, Sarah, and thank you.
Thanks very much, and good morning from a rather dreich and miserable Glasgow. It's just a pity we can't meet in person, as I'd loved nothing more than a trip to Belfast, but many thanks for the opportunity to join you today to share my experiences of community planning in Scotland. It will be a whirlwind overview given the time that we have together, but if you would like to discuss anything further, please don't hesitate to drop me an email. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So in terms of what I'm going to speak about today, I thought it might be helpful just to start by telling you a bit about the improvement service. I'll then move on to speak about the key drivers at a national level to progress shared outcomes, as these really have been fundamental in shaping community planning in Scotland across the last 17 years. Following on from this, I'll highlight what I think has made the difference locally in terms of progressing a shared wellbeing agenda. Whilst we are making good progress, however, we are still grappling with a number of challenges. I'll speak about these, and if you have any suggestions how to tackle them, then please do get in touch and share those thoughts with me. I'll say a bit about the improvement support available to community planning partnerships in Scotland, and then I'll finish with some final thoughts and critical success factors for improving outcomes. I really do hope this will hit the mark and provide some useful insights to help you work in Belfast. Next slide, please. So the IS, we're a not-for-profit company limited by guarantee, and we're celebrating our 15th birthday this year. We have 34 members, causeless solace, in the 32 Scottish local authorities, and we're governed by local government through a board of directors. We're funded through the local government grant settlement, and last year our income totalled 8.8 million. We provide products, services and support to councils and partners in transformation, performance and improvement, data and intelligence and digital public services. Further information on these is available in our newly launched strategic framework, which you can find on our website. Next slide, please. Our vision is to be an agile organisation that supports and mobilises resources for our partners to manage the challenges they face in improving outcomes and reducing inequalities. Next slide, please. Our strapline is the go-to organisation for local government improvement in Scotland. We provide leadership to local government and the wider system on improvement and transformation. We develop capability and capacity for improvement within local government. We deliver national improvement programmes and provide tailored support to councils. We provide research, data and intelligence services, along with delivering a range of national shared service applications and technology platforms. That really is the IS in a nutshell. Next slide, please. I'll move on now to my experience of community planning in Scotland, and I really do think a useful starting point is to chart some of the incremental building blocks which have been fundamental in helping to progress a shared outcomes agenda in Scotland, very much focused on tackling the inequalities and improving wellbeing. So if I take you back to 2003, community planning was first given a statutory basis in the Local Government in Scotland Act, and it was the duty of the local authority alone to facilitate and maintain the community planning process. 2010, the Scottish Ministers invited Dr Campbell Christie to lead a commission to identify the best ways to address the challenges of delivering public services based on evidence of what works. The Christie Commission published its report in June 2011, and 9 years on, we still talk about Christie in Scotland. It has been influential in shaping community planning and the outcomes agenda. Christie recommended that public services are built around people and communities, and that public service organisations work together effectively to achieve outcomes. He recommended that public service organisations prioritise prevention, reduce inequalities and promote equality, and that public services seek to improve performance, reduce costs and are open, transparent and accountable. In 2012, Scottish Government and COSLA published the Statement of Ambition for Community Planning and Single Outcome Agreements, which placed CPPs at the heart of public service reform and emphasised the important role they have to play in delivering better outcomes for communities. In 2012, Audit Scotland worked with its scrutiny partners and other key stakeholders in developing an audit framework for supporting the improved performance and accountability of CPPs. In 2013, the Scottish Government and COSLA published an agreement on joint working in community planning and resourcing, and it stated that CPPs would be expected to draw upon the totality of partner resources, together with those of the third and private sectors and local communities, to improve local outcomes for communities. This all culminated in the Community Empowerment in Scotland Act becoming law in 2015. Next slide, please. So the Act places duties on the 5 named governance partners who are listed on the slide to facilitate community planning and to take all reasonable steps to ensure the CPP conducts its functions effectively and efficiently. It also significantly expands the list of statutory partners from the 2003 Act, who are all listed on the slide. Next slide, please. So the Act places a number of statutory duties on CPPs and on the individual partners, and I think these really have made a difference in terms of how we're progressing community planning in Scotland. So under law, CPPs are now required to prepare and publish a local outcomes improvement plan, which is a bit of a mouthful, and I'll refer to the LOIP from now onwards. So this involves developing and agreeing a common understanding of local needs and opportunities, setting out the local outcomes which the CPP will prioritise for improvement, and developing an effective shared approach for achieving these outcomes. CPPs must also ensure that each local outcome in their plan is consistent with the national outcomes in Scotland's National Performance Framework. They must identify which geographical areas have communities that experience the poorest outcomes and prepare and publish locality plans to improve outcomes on agreed priorities for these communities. They must review and report publicly in progress towards their LOIP and locality plans and keep the continued suitability of these plans under review. Finally, they must take all reasonable steps to secure the involvement in community planning of any community body which it considers is likely to be able to contribute to it. CPPs must in particular have regard to community bodies which represent those communities experiencing socio-economic disadvantage. The guidance also stipulates that third sector interfaces should support effective community planning by building links between third sector bodies and the CPP. In terms of community planning partners, they have duties to work collaboratively with other partners in carrying out community planning. They need to take account of the LOIP in carrying out their own functions, and the LOIP should very much inform each partner's organisational plans and policy. They have a duty to contribute funds, staff and other resources as the CPP considers appropriate to improve local outcomes, and they have a duty to secure and resource the participation of community bodies in community planning. We're 17 years on from community planning being granted a statutory basis in Scotland, and the Community Empowerment Act really has been a game changer in raising the profile of outcomes, tackling inequality and supporting wellbeing. Linked to this, the Fairer Scotland duty, which was introduced in 2018, is another marker put down by Scotland that it wants to make a difference to the lives of those living in socio-economic disadvantage, and it very much ties into wellbeing economy approaches. The culture in Scotland from the top strives to have a positive impact on the wellbeing and equality of outcome for our communities, which is threaded throughout the Community Empowerment Act and thereby into community planning. We're now 5 years on from the passing of the Act, and evidence suggests that some things have landed as intended, and as is always the case, others haven't, and I'll come on and talk about these now. Next slide, please. So we've undertaken a range of research to find out what is working well locally in relation to community planning across Scotland, what challenges partners are facing and what improvement support would be helpful. Sorry, the slide before that, please. And our research has been supplemented, thank you, by findings from Audit Scotland's best value work on local authorities. So across each of the 32 local authority areas, it's fair to say that there is widespread support and commitment to community planning amongst partners. It is viewed as an important vehicle for coordinating multi-agency work in areas of shared interest and a useful means of engaging jointly with communities to improve outcomes. Where it works particularly well, there are local community planning processes in place, reflecting a local will to see communities more directly engaged in planning for their futures. This includes local multi-agency teams, along with area committees and decision-making structures. Another key approach making the difference is the legislative requirement for CPPs to produce LOIPs, which are evidence-based and focused on prevention and reducing inequality. Locality planning is also now a required element of how every CPP should operate, with locality plans targeting geographic communities or communities of interest to experience the greatest inequalities. Strong leadership and commitment in addressing inequalities is apparent amongst community planning partners across Scotland. Good progress is made where linkages are made between the work of the CPP and wider national and regional work taking place. So, for example, links in with the city deals and regional economic planning structures. One of the key factors which appears to differentiate how well CPPs deliver is the extent to which they put the community at the heart of community planning and provide strong leadership on the community empowerment agenda. So some partners coordinate and manage all their activity and community engagement activity through the CPP, for example. There are also several examples of community planning partners making great strides in transferring physical assets to communities. Another key aspect of the Community Empowerment Act was the introduction of a right for community bodies to request for ownership, lease or other rights for any land or building they feel they could make better use of. Some CPPs have community-led action plans in place, empowering and enabling local communities to take on the development and delivery of local programmes, services and facilities, transforming the relationship between statutory agencies and the communities they serve. Finally, participatory budgeting is now almost universally in use across all Scottish councils, albeit the extent of its use and effectiveness varies. Next slide, please. We've also recently undertaken some research with community planning managers to capture learning in the role community planning is playing locally in relation to the COVID-19 response and recovery. And again, what were the critical success factors that made the difference in the response? So we found that existing community planning relationships, infrastructure and ways of working have been fundamental within local emergency and resilience planning structures. Partnerships which were well embedded within their local communities were more easily able to respond and also had already earned the buy-in and trust of the local community. Without these pre-existing relationships, the response would have been much slower and less effective, particularly at targeting support and information from the most vulnerable. Most partnerships drew heavily on the knowledge, connections and expertise of third sector interfaces to mobilise communities, coordinate volunteers and to provide support. Some reflected that there had been a strengthening of relationship with the third sector interface. Partners have had to be less risk averse by placing more trust in frontline staff and communities to go ahead and get things done. And retaining this level of empowerment and ensuring groups that have worked well are sustained going forward will be key. Whilst there has been significant progress in data sharing between partners during the pandemic, particularly in relation to data being shared to allow help to be directed to vulnerable households, for other areas a lack of data sharing was noted as a hurdle. There is a general consensus that the community-led response has enabled a much more rapid and targeted delivery of support to those most in need. And this really is an important point and provides learning for CPPs in relation to their role in supporting empowerment going forward. The crisis response provides an illustration of community planning in action and reflects how partners and communities work together at a community level. And while critical during this time, it is largely reactive and operational, and it will be important to consider how the longer term community planning ambitions are aligning with and contributing to recovery and renewal efforts. Next slide, please. Whilst we're making good progress in Scotland, we're still grappling with a number of challenges, and these vary across CPPs in Scotland. So I suppose I'm talking in the general here about 32 community planning partnerships, and experience does vary. So whilst community planning is intended to be a shared endeavour, the reality in many cases is that councils are still regarded, and to be fair, behave as if it is their lead responsibility. And in some CPPs, buy-in and leadership from other partners remains variable. Whilst all LOIPs have a strong prevention focus, they are generally not yet backed up by delivery plans, which contain specific actions and clarity about how resources will be deployed to turn the LOIP's ambitions into change on the ground. There is slow progress in joint resourcing at strategic level, with commitment to the LOIP not yet clearly reflected in all partner resource allocation processes or decisions. Furthermore, resource planning cycles are not always aligned across key partners. There's a lack of alignment between the performance management systems of national agencies and those set out in the LOIP. We are probably, like many others, are still grappling with how to measure outcomes, particularly given how many will be delivered over the long term against much shorter parliamentary cycles. There are also issues of attribution. How can you really know if the activities of partners collectively have made a difference, and in what way? Some CPPs are making slower progress than others in developing their locality plans, and some have developed them for all of their areas rather than just target resources and those experiencing the most inequalities. There are also difficulties establishing robust governance and accountability arrangements through which partners can and do truly hold each other to account for their performance. There is a view that there needs to be clearer requirements in each statutory agency through their own governance structure, with community planning being a core part of organisational governance and accountability frameworks. So even although we have community empowerment enshrined in legislation, some CPPs are grappling with implementing the commitment. Some point to communities still not feeling their voices are actively influencing decision making by public bodies. Others point to the lack of capacity in communities, albeit the response to the pandemic has shown just how much capacity there has been. There are also issues of inclusion and diversity, with community planning managers expressing concerns that community engagement processes tend to repeatedly involve certain groups and individuals rather than a cross-section of the relevant community, and can in turn simply replicate the power inequalities at play in communities. I do believe and hope that the community focus of the pandemic is an opportunity to pause and reset and ensure the community is at the heart of community planning, with communities consistently being recognised as part of the local solution to problems. We have anecdotal evidence from one CPP that those more deprived communities who have been supported with community empowerment were much better able to deal with the pandemic when it hit the more affluent and less connected communities. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So one of the factors which definitely does make a difference in Scotland is the national leadership for community planning. So we're a member of a National Community Planning Improvement Board, which comprises chief officers from statutory community planning partners, Scottish Government and improvement bodies, and it's chaired by Solace. So the key roles of this board are to bring together and share evidence of what works well in community planning, to influence policy practice and reform of public services at local and national levels, to collaborate and ensure capacity and resources are targeted to where they are most needed, and to offer practical support to CPPs with their challenges around governance, leadership, scrutiny, analysis and decision making. At its recent meeting, the board recognised that CPPs have provided a platform for the progress we have seen in public service partners working in partnerships with communities and the third sector interfaces to respond to COVID, and that this has happened at a pace and depth not previously experienced. The board has highlighted the importance of seizing and galvanising on this to help realise the long-term ambition of community planning. So we're now working with CPPs to develop a set of propositions to help champion the agenda over the period ahead and to ensure that the gains achieved are not lost post-COVID. We've agreed 6 priority themes for our work programme, which aim to address the challenges I've spoken about and provide an opportunity to refocus and redouble efforts in areas Scotland hasn't made as much progress on. Next slide, please. I won't talk about this slide, but I thought it would be useful just to let you know about some of the support that we do provide to CPPs individually. So hopefully you'll find those links useful if you have a chance to look at them. Next slide, please. I guess that the final thoughts from me in terms of the critical success factors based on learning from Scotland in terms of how we improve outcomes. Firstly, I can't stress enough the importance of embracing a collective leadership approach and culture and shared ambition and ownership of the changes partners want to see. And we've certainly found that joint training and development of leaders can support this. I believe it's important resourcing is aligned to priorities. Sharing information about spending priorities, pressures and plans at the budget preparation stage can lead to much more meaningful discussion about strategic resource shift. I think COVID has given us an opportunity to pause and reset and really ensure that the community is at the heart of community planning. I would encourage a focus in governance and decision making as part of a culture and feature of strong relationships, not simply something achieved through formal structures and processes. It will be important to ensure mechanisms are in place to share data and intelligence and work together to address any data sharing barriers. It's important to evaluate the impact of partnership activities against the delivery of outcomes and identify short, medium and long-term outcome improvement targets. And finally, we've learned firsthand from our work with some CPPs in facilitating self-assessment and improvement planning about the importance of embracing a culture of continuous improvement and learning. And our experience also highlights the importance of establishing national mechanisms to encourage partners to learn from the experience of others, to jointly explore and develop approaches to delivering partnership priorities and to test out new ideas and sharing learning and practice. So thanks very much for your time and for the opportunity to speak to you today. And I know our time has been limited and there's a lot to take in, but please do get in touch if there's anything that you would like to pick up further or any more information you would like about what's happening in Scotland. And then please, and hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Very interesting. And I think, you know, when you talk about the importance of shared focus on tackling inequalities by all partners is one of the ones that we recognise here in Belfast. And with our outcome-based programme, there's a clear need to link community planning with regional policies. I'm kind of thinking of the forthcoming community wealth building and anti-poverty strategies discussed earlier by the Minister. So delighted that you could be with us here this morning.